Thank you, Tim. I've very much been looking forward to being here with you today, which is not something I say everywhere I go, but particularly in light of what is taking place in this diocese. So I come to you today to present some things, but very much to take a lot home with me, simply because of the advanced nature of what you are setting out on and have been doing for some time in the context of NCD. So as Tim mentioned, I'm the director of NCD Australia, have been since about 2005, and since around about the same time been one of the directors of NCD International. So I work very closely with Christian Schwartz on the development of the various tools and also the rollout of NCD around the world. The presentation today, you'll be able to access all the slides and everything like that, so if you want to make notes along the way, you can compare that with the slides later on. I have had an enjoyable time working with Anglicans over the last 16 years or so in different parts of the world, and I feel quite at home with Anglicans. You can have quite a rich conversation quite quickly with them. There's other things that they're not so strong on, perhaps, like finding the way to the front row and what have you. There's a certain level of diffidence and hesitance, perhaps, but nevertheless, I feel very at home, so I really look forward to the discussions and exploration of these different topics, because a key part of being part of the NCD ministry worldwide is to be a lifelong learner, and so I very much enjoy each week of this ministry discovering new things, having looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of surveys of all different kinds, and yet still finding something new to discover, something God's pointing us towards at every level in each result. So I've called this day, the three spheres of NCD, releasing salt and light across the Diocese of Coventry, in part because of some recent discoveries that we have about the process of NCD, more particularly how people approach it, what the default actions are by church leaders, and the good ones and the challenging ones that we need to look at in order to make sure we can continue to move leaders and local churches further and further along Jesus' sort of promised journey to life, if you like. And so I come to you with a very strong sense of this being a significant moment in time for a number of reasons. In this particular gathering, you have some interesting political challenges in your country. There's the East Island of United Kingdom, that large continent to the side that there's a separation coming from in some form. And I actually sat up, as geeky as it is, I sat up and listened to the telecast of the entire Brexit vote. Quite intrigued by such things. But there are opportunities, I think, that come through all of this. The kingdom of God is in some large part about the governance of God coming to earth. So if we as Christians are not engaged at some level saying, what does this speak to us in this time window about taking people in the United Kingdom to a new place, the church playing a significant role in that, and helping God's kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven. If we're not engaged in that, then we're really missing something. So there's an opportune part related to that. More broadly, in the Christian church worldwide, there are concerns at all sorts of levels that relate to changing attendance patterns, all sorts of social factors, social media, and how do we wrestle with all these different parts. And there's certain anxiety in different areas, and we need to be able to address that, and to speak into that at a universal principle level is a very important part of what everyone in the room has to play. We need to be engaged in that, in large part to provide that confidence to say that a faithful God is faithful to something. That is, a faithful God is faithful to his own principles, and therefore, even in turbulent times, we can have a certain assurance that underpinning all of this are some key principles. So that's a significant part in this time window. On the NCD International perspective, Christian and I in particular have been working on a number of significant projects for nearly a decade, and some of these projects do take a very long time because we spend a lot of time in research to make sure that what comes out the end has to be applicable in all sorts of contexts. So we don't sit down and say, oh, here's a few good ideas, let's spit out a book. So it's a very long process, but it just happens that this year we will have probably the release and completion of more of those products and tools and various things than we've had probably at any point in NCD's history. So again, critical moment in time. But the final thing for me that ties all that together and connects in with all of you is that the strategy you're involved in this diocese, for me, is, from any I've seen around the world, the most consistent and deliberate strategy I've seen anywhere in relation to NCD. Now, some of you more melancholics may look at it and say, well, it could be a lot better and we should be moving faster and we should have better progress. That's fine. You can normalise that however you like. But the reality is what has come together here is just extraordinary, and I only have a little taste of it through the data and through some of the stories. So the potential influence not only within the diocese but in the wider Anglican world and far beyond the boundaries of the Anglican Church, that's part of the picture. I don't want to overwhelm you with any of that, but that's just a reality as it sits here. So the significance of this moment in time and where you're at, particularly where you're at in the process within the diocese, is a critical moment. And that's the main part I want to speak into today, because we've seen significant progress in a number of parishes and congregations so far in this diocese. But there's a critical moment that comes in all movements as they're engaged in NCD, where we need to understand the next steps in order to keep that progress moving forward. So there is a lot of significance about this moment, and that excites me. I look forward to exploring that through today with you. If we now move to take a look at the results from a different perspective, and this is quite a recent approach that sort of occurred to us, and wow, this is a very helpful way to start looking at the results by taking the NCD jargon and backing right out of it to speak in some really everyday kind of terms about dynamics of church life. And the first of those is to talk about this very common kind of idea of the front door and the back door. So it occurred to us that these three characteristics across the bottom have the strongest affinity. They're not exclusively there because they're all required and connected, but they have the strongest affinity to front door dynamics. So gift-based ministry, yes, of course you might use your gifts in the context of church activities, but you will use your gifts mostly outside of those because you spend most of your life outside of church activities. Need-oriented evangelism, of course, is overtly front door. It's going outside the church and connecting. And inspiring worship from a spiritual development faith perspective is the public forum that represents the front door, access to church life. So that the point about the front door is that you want a big wide front door for two purposes. One is people are able to become part of the fellowship, but also you can send people out the front door to minister to other people. So that's the importance of the front door. The other side then, of course, is the backdoor dynamics, and these are more to do with the ways of developing people once they've come in the front door, the ways of growing them and nurturing them. And of course, these two parts necessarily come together, because if you only focus on the front door and not the back door, you lose people at the back door, which means even if your main interest is in evangelistic activities, you're losing your workforce out the back door. So you have to care about the back door, even if you're a front door oriented person. And if you're a back door oriented person, nurturing and developing and what have you, you have to care about the front door, or you've got no one to nurture and develop. So basically, you have to care about both, no matter which way you're wired. Now, interestingly, in this particular context, just to mention as an aside, in the coming weeks, we're going to integrate these dynamics, this particular picture, into the summary profiles that any church will get as part of their results, because we're finding it's such a helpful way to simplify the whole thing and just to say, have you had friends or family that have disappeared out the back door? Okay, yes, now I have an emotional connection to this. What are you going to tell me about the health of our church? Well, by the way, Here's why your pipe's losing people at the front door. Or have you had difficulty or awkwardness about wanting people to join and be part of your church family, but you're unsure about it? Okay, here are the front door dynamics that are preventing that from happening. So people then have a much stronger vested interest in exploring church health because they can relate to those dynamics. So that will become part of the profile shortly. But this is not the critical factor for this diocese, this front door, back door. Yes, maybe the front door is slightly more open, the back door might be a slightly larger challenge here, but they're relatively balanced. It's not the critical place that we need to look. Whereas right now, we need to look at the other kind of dimension of this picture. And if we look at the sides, we can look at two aspects of church life. One is the exhaling side, that is giving what you have. And if we're going to pursue this idea of natural church development, there has to be connections we can draw to the way that a healthy human being or healthy living thing functions. I mean, humans and plants, they both breathe. That's a noticeable characteristic. Breathing's a terrific idea. You should try it sometime. And so the exhaling is a necessary component of that within life. It's taking what you have and it's giving out from those reserves. Of course, that then implies that you have this inhaling pole, which is receiving from others. It's the acknowledgement of what you don't have access to, what you need to get from outside of yourself. So what we can see straight away, just at a quick glance, is the exhaling side for the diocese. So the average Joe, the average congregation, the diocese as a whole, is better at exhaling, giving out, serving, giving what is currently available, but has much more difficulty on the inhale side. So it kind of needs an asthma puffer, like a giant, is that what you call them here? An inhaler. It's to kind of make it easier to draw inwards. And so we can move into the detail of the results very much down to the question level. Of course, I love to do that. I was one of the main designers of that, and you get great value from that. But to zoom back out at this level and to understand all of the challenges that we find through the diocese at every level and within congregations, if we have that in the back of our mind, we're mainly looking at an inhale challenge here. How do we help people to inhale on the basis that there's something to inhale, that there are other people that have something that they could feed into your life, that God himself has a lot he could probably feed into you, won't force himself upon you, but you have to actually open up in order to receive that and to take that in. So that then starts to focus very strongly the challenge we have. And so what we're talking about here is really the pneuma, the breath of God. So we can take it to that very spiritual understanding that in order that we might pass on the breath of God, that we might breathe into the lives of other people, that God's Spirit might work through us and minister to other people, we have to be drawing in that breath at the same time. So we are in this very intimate respiration process with God, from God to other people, from other people to us, from God to us. There is an in-breathing and out-breathing that must be part of the natural experience of the kingdom of God and church life. So what we can also zoom out to is to say, we have on this side this holistic small groups, passionate spirituality and inspiring worship. And these are all kind of contexts or places in which people in one way or another are helped to inhale. And so you can see at a glance, some of them are doing better than others, but ultimately that's the main focus. It doesn't mean it's exclusively about inhaling, but they have a tendency to be more about inhaling. And so we can see those results. But even if we just took a glance at the story guide, which takes the NCD results and presents it in kind of just theme language, then what we have is the three lowest themes for the diocese are those of intimacy, vision, and hope. And they all also have a very strong affinity to the idea of inhaling. So intimacy, the idea of opening yourself up that others might speak into your life and feed into your life, has an inherently inhaling dimension to it. So whenever we're having that discussion, we can keep that inhale thing in the back of our mind. Vision is an intriguing one because most of the speak around vision in the church world in many contexts is about casting a vision, putting a vision out there. Most times what they're talking about is telling everyone what your plan is. It's not many times is not really vision. I mean, vision, just take the word, vision presumably means you can see something. It's a capacity to see before it's the capacity to speak. So to take in the evidence of, we've got these people here, they've got that gift, that's interesting. And God seems to be doing that in that person's life. And we just heard about this thing happening in our local community. That collective vision, ability to open your eyes and see and to inhale all the information that's available, is the more essential component. I mean, the vision casting, yeah, you do that in the end. This is what I've seen. Yeah, wow, I just told you simply what I've taken in. But the more substantial part of vision is the capacity to see. Behold the new thing I'm doing. Do you perceive it, as God says? So it is inherently about the opening of eyes. And then hope, of course, is, to be filled with hope. You can't generally, if you are in hopeless situations, you can't typically create hope from yourself. You have to get hope from somewhere, have some reason for hope. Give the reason for the hope that is within you. Presumably it came from outside of yourself. So if we have people coming through, and that is a challenge still, albeit at a higher level, we still have a lot of people in this diocese for whom hope is a challenge. We're perhaps wondering about the future for our families, for our congregation at all sorts of levels, but they need to be able to draw that in from somewhere. They need to be able to inhale the encouraging stories, the accounts, the experiences of other people are having with God, the success that perhaps another congregation is beginning to have as they address their health issues. So these are all inherently inhale type themes. And it's completely tied to our ability to continue to exhale. Eventually, the tank will run empty if you're unable to fill it up in that way. So, if I now just move to a series of kind of connecting ideas that relate to these two poles. And the main reason to put these up here is that you might look at these pairs of terms and you might feel a stronger connection with those. You might say, yes, as I look at my experience of church life across the diocese or my own direct work with different groups of people, I can see how that tendency is more strong in certain places. So on the inhaling side, receiving from others, giving what you have. If we go beyond that, the inhale side, a focus on what we need as opposed to what we have. To what extent is the awareness of what we need, what we are deficient in, what we may need to ask for or depend upon in some way? To what extent are people seeing that? Another one is the difference on one side. One side is to act, the other side is to be acted upon. So the preparedness that God might act on you or that others might act on you that influence you. Think of this in terms of the potter and the clay. So if you are on the act side, then you are more the potter. If you're on the acted upon, you're more the clay. So to what extent are we each prepared to be both? Because we need to be the potter for those who need developing, who are perhaps not as far along as we are, but for those who are further along than we are, and God's a little bit further along than we are, that God is then the potter and we are the clay. To what extent are we prepared to be moulded and changed and adjusted and to be grown in that form? And so never one is being played off against the other. They are both needed, but are we as open to both terms? The unknown and the known. Are we open to the unknown as much as we are open to the known? So we want to know. We want the confidence of what is known, things that are clear, things that give us that sense of security. But what about the unknown things? Are we interested in the unknown experiences another person has of God? Are we open to hearing about those and discovering what they are? Are we open to the unknowns that may exist in the future if we were courageous enough to take a few steps here and there? And the interesting thing about the unknown and known is that to move from the unknown to the known is to move through a process of demystification. We want to take the mystery out, we want to make something concrete. So what we can see here is that generally in the diocese, we prefer to demystify, to move a bit more to the concrete side. But there's a great term that's been used sometimes, is the remystification. that's necessary in any growth process. Because once you know something, that helps you discover suddenly what you don't know. So every time you learn something, you discover what you don't know, which has to ideally lead you back into remystification, where you wonder, you ask questions, you explore things, you realise what you don't know. And I love at the towards the end of Jesus' teaching ministry, he said, "There's so much more I want to tell you, but you can't handle it yet." So the idea of prerequisite learning is built right there into the ministry of Jesus. So the willingness to say, wow, there's some things we don't know and perhaps we can't even know. And that leads to the next one, which is the tendency on one side to be the rational side. We want to be able to work things out. We want to be able to figure things out, and that's where we are most interested. But you have this other side, which is the trans-rational side, which goes beyond your rational capacity. You simply can't figure it out. You simply don't know it. You don't have the mental faculties, the experience, or the information to figure out what it is. Now, please take note, trans-rational is not irrational. It's actually irrational to focus purely on the rational. If you think you can figure everything out, that's thoroughly irrational. Whereas to recognise that your life, and clearly in the line of work I'm in, I like to focus a fair bit on the rational, but it's very healthy for me to constantly come back and say, wow, there's a whole bunch of things I don't have the slightest idea about, and I have no idea what will happen. Just a confession, when I come to a group like this, I've been presenting like this for about 18 years. I get anxious every time still. I come into this room and I'm thinking, what, am I prepared enough? Have I got the right questions? Have I got the right information? And then God sort of taps me a bit on it's like, what's the likelihood you could possibly have any idea what's going to happen in that room? It's like, yeah, thanks for the comfort. That's terrific. Very soothing. But that's the point, is I'm meeting people and there is a trans-rational component to this where I'm going to be interacting with your experiences and your thoughts and your questions on that basis. But are we willing to be in that space? There is also this other side of determining and acknowledging. And we have to be connected to both sides. There are things we can determine, things that we can play a significant part in determining what the outcome will be, what the goal will be, what the plan will be. But on the acknowledging side, it's simply accepting that certain things are as they are. And we have this in some movements that take the gift test, the NCD gift test, and their young people start coming up with gifts that they're theologically not allowed to have. So what do you do with that? You say, we should sit them down and tell them, no, actually, you think that God's working that way in your life, but really our doctrine doesn't allow that. So clearly you're mistaken, rather than saying maybe you should acknowledge what is happening there. So in our context here, what needs to be acknowledged about the spiritual styles or the ways that people encounter God? What needs to be validated about the ways that different people experience God, that in their Anglicanism and politeness perhaps, they are less inclined to speak about or might keep a little bit hidden, and yet if they did share about it, it might be edifying for everybody. It might be very, very helpful simply to acknowledge that if God is working in people's lives, we should be looking at that. Coming towards the end, the two dimensions here, and this becomes really quite practical in terms of the process taken so far. We looked at how that circle before moved further towards the right. And so in one sense we can say that the organisational approach to improving the health of congregations is the stronger part in the picture for the diocese. So the organisation is about taking things you already have and rearranging them in the most useful way. So it says I have a set amount of stuff and we have to put it together in a way that will be more fruitful than it currently is. The difference on the transformational side is making things fundamentally different. It's not just moving them about, it's actually turning them into something new. So this is Romans 12:2 type thing. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The metamorphosis, the caterpillar to butterfly change, that it is now a fundamentally different thing than what it was before. So in the process of NCD, we can reorganise things so that passionate spirituality has a better place. We can put on some more prayer meetings, we can arrange the timings, we can allow some more space for this, some space for that. We can put certain people in gifted roles because they have giftedness, prophetic or prayer giftedness that would enhance things. They're kind of organisational steps. But to change people and to develop their spiritual experience within themselves, that's a transformative process. And that's so pointing towards where the next phase needs to move to within the diocese. And the last one is the sort of kind of classic doing and being. But I used to be really irritated by this. People say, oh, it's not about what you do, it's who you are. And I always would integrate them until I start looking at profiles where you can see a tendency one side to the other. So if you come into our church context, we may do things for you. We may try to minister to you in different ways, and clearly so. In the gift-based ministry, everything on the right-hand side of this profile says there's plenty of great doing happening, and that's essential. But if you come into our fellowship, just by standing in the presence with us, or come into our homes, just by standing there, are you affected by what you're swimming in that moment? Are you being affected by the radiating beings that are around you, that you smell and taste the presence of God in different ways, or you hear it, you're impacted upon it without being ministered to, but simply by being in the presence of. And so hopefully that gives a little bit of a picture What I want to do is switch now to briefly have a look at something we've been engaging much more with lately, and that is we've been starting to do split profiles on an age basis, and in particular finding great fruit in splitting the above 30 versus under 30 profile to see what insights we can find. I understand there's a number in the room that are working in that sort of in the younger age group ministry, and so if we look at the youth in Coventry, we have pretty good sampling. I mean, it's 5%, and under 30 is 5% of the overall sample, but it's certainly large enough to base some very reasonable things on. So what I'm going to do first of all is, this is the same overall picture, and I'm just obviously showing you one part of it, trying to conceal things. But on the right-hand side here, we can see that the solid yellow line is the under 30s. The dotted line is the over 30s. So we can see there's a fair bit of consistency there, quite similar in the perspectives. And what's noteworthy is that the under 30s are expressing great appreciation that leaders are exhaling into their life, empowering them, passing on power to them. So whoever's involved in those new things, first of all, hats off, this is fantastic. And it's a lot of respect being shown by the younger people to say, we appreciate the fact that there is empowerment here. There is a desire to reach out, to elevate us and to help us along, to play a part in whatever we're doing. So that's extremely encouraging. There's not a sense of, sitting in the corner and huffing and puffing and hissing and saying everything's terrible. There's a respect that's coming through there and a desire to serve. So a lot of unity there across the ages. And this is a huge factor we need to explore these days. There's a lot of experimentation with youth-only churches and various different things. Most of it, for me, is a mangling of community in all sorts of ways. I mean, the intergenerational church, for me, is the ideal kind of context. Assuming it's healthy and assuming there's mutual respect in all directions, it's an ideal thing. So wherever we can find that unity, we need to speak into it and acknowledge it and highlight it, to say that even if we feel effective structures could be a lot better, at least we're unified about it. We all agree it should be better. That's great. But at the same time, gift-based ministry, almost exactly the same values there. So there's a lot of unity within that needs to be emphasised and brought out, particularly in these quite divisive times sometimes. Now, obviously, you know that I have been hiding the other part of the chart. But, first of all, this is the exhaling dimension, very, very similar on the exhaling side and the acknowledgement of the exhaling side. We then reveal the other side of the chart. And it's creative, a diplomatic term. The first jump-out points for me are that for the under 30s, the need-oriented evangelism result is noticeably higher. So the engagement in that, the recognition of that, somehow they're connected with some sense of presenting the gospel to the point of need of people to a great extent. I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. That's a terrific thing to see in the picture here, incredibly encouraging. Also, on the top left, we see that the higher result for holistic small groups. So the younger generation, and it's perhaps not surprising given the shifts in social media and the general openness of the environment, to share openly and to open yourself to other people is much stronger in the under 30s. So therefore, the older ones can perhaps look at that and say, what can we learn from that? So in both ends, that's very, very positive. So that's the good news. On the other side is, if we do remember again, this left-hand side is the inhaling, and we're talking about the breath of God being drawn in by people so they can give out, we then start to have a critical problem emerging here. That is that the willingness and engagement in the under 30s for exhaling is just as strong as those over 30, but the lungs are in great danger of collapsing. The ability to inhale, the ability to find the way, how do I most naturally connect with God? How do I inhale so that I can continue to give out? So it's a concern that the sustainability of the under 30s and what they're doing is of great concern and needs to be addressed at a given point in time. Because while there may be unity about the low passionate spirituality, it's even more of a challenge for the younger generation.